Hello everyone, and welcome to the Chapter 14 STEM Challenge. This time, The World Within, we'll be looking at, for the last two chapters in the course, we'll be looking at ecology and environmental science. So Chapter 14, we're going to be looking at all of Chapter 14. Some of the terms, we're going to be looking at individual, population, community, ecosystem, biome, and biosphere. Real quick, an individual is an individual of one species. A group of the same species is called a population. That population living with other types of organisms is called a community. Next chapter, Chapter 15, we'll be talking about populations and communities. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about ecosystems and biomes and some of the terms that go along with this. And anywhere there's life on our planet, from the highest place in the sky to the deepest part of the ocean, anywhere there's life around the planet is called the biosphere. So one of the questions you'll have is, what's the difference between a biome and an ecosystem? An ecosystem is the interaction of living and non-living things. They have a special name. We'll get to that in a second. And a biome is a specific geographic area of the planet. And we'll see examples of that in the chapter. But just keep this in mind, that a biome is a group of similar ecosystems. So the science of ecology, what we're going to do for lesson objectives, we're going to distinguish between these terms, abiotic and biotic. We're going to define what an ecosystem is and some ecological concepts. Very important is bullet number 3, how energy flows through ecosystems. We're going to be looking at food chains and food webs and looking at different what are called trophic levels in a food chain or food web. So the first term that is important is the difference between abiotic factors. Those are non-living aspects of the environment, such as sunlight, soil, temperature, and water. You're going to see that temperature and water, very, very important coming up in what creates a biome. And biotic factors, such as the living organisms that include same species, but also different species. Here's a picture of a desert ecosystem, and make sure you read this and understand what an ecosystem is. Very important is the flow of energy. Energy enters ecosystems in the form of sunlight or chemical compounds. Most of the time, when you think about ecosystems, it's going to be sunlight. Some at the bottom of the ocean are chemical compounds, but most terrestrial and even ocean ecosystems start with sunlight. Producers are those organisms that produce food and know the difference between photoautotrophs and chemoautotrophs. Consumers, that's us, or we're one of the many consumers. Consumers are organisms that can't make their own food, and they must grab the energy from other plants and animals. So make sure you know what herbivores are, carnivores, and omnivores. We are omnivores. We eat both plants and animals. After organisms die, decomposers will take all of that matter that we're composed of and put it back into the environment. Make sure you know what scavengers, detritivores, and what detritus is, and saprotrophs. Here's a diagram of a food chain from your text. The important thing is, here's our plant, which is growing with sunlight and through photosynthesis, but then you'll notice these blue arrows going up. That means the energy flowing through a food chain. Here's a little more complicated one. This is a food web, because most ecosystems have food webs, not a single chain. Taking a look at which way the energy flows. Again, all starting right here. Phytoplankton is a type of plant. So it starts with a plant, and once these plants produce the energy, that energy flows through this food web. This is referred to as an ecological pyramid. The pyramid shows how energy and biomass decrease as you go from one level to the next. So each of these is a what's called a trophic level, and you'll notice that the amount of energy, like think of the range here, goes down as we go up into this food pyramid. These are some of the more dominant biomes on our planet. We live in the Philadelphia area right over here, and that, if we look down at the bottom there, we are a temperate deciduous forest. Way up in Canada, we have the tundra. We have tropical rainforests down here in Brazil. This is a very generalized map of biomes. It's much more broken up when you look at on a more granular level. Biomes are really important because they have plants, and we get a lot of our medicines from plants. That's a link to show you some of the most common ones. Now, Matter has to be recycled through ecosystems, and we're going to be looking at some biogeochemical cycles. They're very important. We'll look at the water cycle, we'll look at the carbon, and we'll look at the nitrogen cycle. A lot of you have already seen the water cycle. This is showing you, let's say, the ocean, which is salty water. This evaporation is only fresh water, though. All the salt stays in the ocean. Only fresh water evaporates, forms clouds, clouds condense, forms rain, and fresh water flows through. Make sure you know the major steps of the water cycle. This is a very important cycle right now, and that's how is carbon recycled in our planet? Notice these three categories over here: the geosphere, the biosphere, the atmosphere. And in here, it shows you the red lines of how carbon comes out of the geosphere, how carbon goes back into various parts of the geosphere. Make sure you understand this diagram. We have a good animation on it coming up right here. So this is the carbon cycle by Ted Ed. Really well done illustrations. Please watch this. It's a short animation, but it'll explain the carbon cycle. If you've never heard of the carbon cycle before, watch this a couple times. The nitrogen cycle is interesting because the air that you're breathing in right now is 78% nitrogen. And plants need that nitrogen, but there's an irony right here. In order for this plant to grow, it needs nitrogen in a form called nitrates. But the problem is the nitrogen in the air this plant can't use. So living close to the plant's roots are these nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which take nitrogen from the air, which is in the soil, but puts it into a form that can be used to grow this plant. So the nitrogen cycle, this is in a terrestrial ecosystem between the atmosphere and living things. So this is how nitrogen circulates through an ecosystem. Make sure you read and study that. We also have a short TED Ed talk on the Haber process. The Haber process was the first industrial process. It was discovered in 1913 on how to take nitrogen that's in the air and turn it into ammonia, into NH3, so that we can grow many more crops. So if you'll notice, here's the ammonia. Watch this carefully. A lot of people have not heard of the Haber process, but it's the only reason we can feed as many people as we can on the planet today. We talk a little bit about climate change right now because climate change is such an important issue. And I do think that human beings will find a solution to climate change, but it will be a hybrid solution, meaning that it will be a combination of these three. It'll be pure technology. I think we'll invent machines which will suck carbon out of the air. It might be pure nature where we will green a lot more of the Earth's surface. We will plant a lot of trees. We will grow a lot, because those plants will suck in carbon also out of the atmosphere. And then there might be a bioengineering solution. We'll increase algae in the oceans. But I think we'll, if you want to talk more about these, you can bring this up in our discussions. This is a really powerful talk. It's a 20-minute talk by Alan Savory on how to fight desertification and reverse climate change. I think you'll find this interesting. 14.3 talks about biomes. We saw that map a few slides ago. They start talking about the difference between climate and weather. A lot of people don't understand the difference between climate and weather. Make sure you do. This is the Sahara Desert on the left and tropical rainforest in Australia on the right. Two very different biomes, and they're found at approximately the same distance from the equator. How is that possible? We'll discuss that in a second. There's the same diagram that we looked at earlier for different biomes. This is the Whittaker biome diagram, and it's showing you that two factors: rainfall, annual precipitation here in centimeters. In our area, we are a temperate seasonal forest. We get just over 100 centimeters of rain, and our average temperature, this is in Celsius, is just between 10 and 20. Depending on where you live on the planet, depending on its annual temperature and the amount of water it gets, it will determine what type of biome you have. So for example, when it's really cold and not much rain, you get tundra. If it was just the opposite, if it was much warmer and got many centimeters of rain a year, 400 in this case, you would have a tropical rainforest. Make sure you understand what this Whittaker biome diagram is. Biodiversity, real important to biologists. Make sure you watch this TED Ed and why it's so important. I'm going to end this quick overview of Chapter 14 with this website. It's called the Earth Biogenome Project, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to sequence all life on the planet. It's very, very ambitious. If you're interested, you might want to look at that. We looked at this earlier. This is the mutual causal interaction. This is about feedback loops. Just remind yourself of that. That's very important to ecosystems. And we also have the Encyclopedia of Life, which is a global access to knowledge about life on Earth. Also a really powerful resource if you're interested in ecology. Okay, that concludes our short overview, our quick overview of Chapter 14. Good luck on the quiz, and please read and study all of Chapter 14.